Hi, everybody. Briana Whitney here, host of True Crime AZ Live. We're broadcasting from Arizona, but we truly cover cases from A to Z all over the country with this show. We've got a big show on tap for you tonight, and I say that A to Z because we are starting off across the country tonight in Massachusetts with one of the most famous true crime cases in the country this year, the Karen Read case. That is where we begin tonight with segment one of the show, The Big Case. Okay. So most people probably have heard of the Karen Read case this year, especially, if not in the last 3 years. I want to get people up to speed, though. If you haven't heard of it, or if you just need kind of a refresher on what happened, this all went down in Massachusetts. Karen Read was dating Boston police officer John O'Keefe. And back in 2022, the two of them had gone out drinking for the night with friends. There was heavy drinking going on that night. They went to bars. They eventually ended up at a house party with one of their friends. Those friends also part of the Boston Police Department. In some regard, these are people that like to go out. They liked to, party. I mean, this was a fun night for them. And what was supposed to be fun ended up with this bizarre mystery and death of John O'Keefe. It was back in 2022 when the morning after that party, John O'Keefe was found dead in the snow on the driveway where everybody had been. Now, this is a very highly contested case. Karen Read was eventually charged with second-degree murder in the claims that she was drunk and intentionally hit him with her car, that they were fighting over whether they were going to go to this party or not, that she was mad at him, called him dozens of times when she left the party early and he decided to stay, and she was on trial for his murder. It was a highly contested trial and case because many people felt that the party goers, the friends, were acting strange and things were being covered up, and that there was possibly this conspiracy that went on inside the house with something that may have happened to John there, and that Karen was kind of used as a patsy. But there was a lot of other people who then believed that Karen did hit him with the car, whether that was intentional or whether she accidentally hit him because she had been drinking. This case went to trial, criminal trial first, and it was a hung jury. So they had to do the whole thing over again, another criminal trial. And that time, Karen Read was acquitted of second-degree murder in the case. She was only found guilty on a misdemeanor of drunk driving and sentenced to probation for 1 year. And so it is one of those cases where you don't see this all the time, but we're talking mobs of people outside the courthouse celebrating Karen Read going free. There was all these signs, free Karen Read. I mean, we're talking people just lining the sidewalks and the streets, something that we don't see a lot of these days. What comes to mind for me is the Jodi Arias case here in Arizona, where there were crowds outside the courthouse yelling, in that case, wanting her to be convicted. A lot of people in this case hoping that Karen Read would not be convicted. So why are we talking about Karen Read again? She was found not guilty. She's getting on with her life. Well, this isn't really over. And honestly, we're probably going to see this go into about 2027 because John O'Keefe's family has now filed a wrongful death lawsuit. They filed it a bit ago, but it's now back in court after that second trial. What does that mean? Well, they believe that she should still be held accountable and is responsible for John O'Keefe's death. They claim that she hit him with her car and left him in the blizzard in Massachusetts to die. They're also claiming emotional distress, that Read, quote, knowingly and deliberately changed her story and fabricated a story. And of course, Karen Read's defense team says, there's other people in that house. Something happened, and they are using Karen Read as a patsy to blame her. What came out in Monday's hearing in this case was this kind of bombshell announcement that Karen Read's team now plans to sue a bunch of people. We're talking about the Massachusetts State Police, other police investigators, a former trooper, Michael Proctor, who had sent these awful text messages about her appearance and her personality, and the people they went out drinking with that night who were in the house party, planning to sue them all for violating Karen Read's civil rights. But this is going to be quite a bit different than the criminal trial. We're talking about the same people involved. We're talking about the same evidence. But the burden of proof in this civil lawsuit, this wrongful death lawsuit, is a lot lower than it was in these criminal trials where they had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Read intentionally hit John O'Keefe with her car and killed him. And so I want to kind of break down what this is going to look like, and I'm really excited to bring in our live guest tonight. We're lucky to be joined by Catherine Loftus, an attorney in Massachusetts. She's really big on TikTok and Instagram and has done a lot of analysis in the Karen Read case. Catherine, thank you so much. I know a lot of people watching us are actually watching on the West Coast. It's past 10 p.m. there, so we really appreciate you doing this and all the knowledge that you have in this case. So
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So I want to kind of start out with the differences here in terms of the burden of proof that they would need to prove in this case. The big difference here, we're talking beyond reasonable doubt in a criminal trial, but this is preponderance of evidence in this trial, which I understand to mean basically they need to prove that it's more likely she's responsible for his death than not. Is that accurate? And how would you characterize those two differences?
You're exactly right. So in a criminal trial, we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that the government, because they're trying to take away your life, liberty, property, they're held to the highest burden. They have to prove the charges against you. And here in Massachusetts, we have a very protective jury instruction. Essentially, what the court has said through the Supreme Judicial Court, which is the highest court in Massachusetts, is that you have to essentially be morally certain that a person has committed a crime. And so we saw, as you said, two criminal trials. One was a hung jury, and the second was a not guilty on everything outside of the operating under the influence. Now, the civil case is a wrongful death suit, which has been filed by the family of John O'Keefe on behalf of essentially the estate. But his brother, Paul, is the executor. And that's a wrongful death suit as well as emotional distress claims. And that, as you stated, is what we call preponderance of the evidence. And you really think about it's quite literally like a balancing of two sets of interests. You look at the wrongful death claim, and if the jury or a judge finds that it's more likely than not that the allegations made by the O'Keefe estate are accurate, then the verdict goes in the favor of the plaintiff. And so it's a much lower standard. Of course, it's not as low as probable cause or reasonable suspicion, but you don't have to get very far. You really only have to get over 51%. If you get there, that's considered a win in civil court.
And that's quite a bit less than beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Quite a bit less. It's significantly less, and it's a much easier burden to meet. And that doesn't mean that they'll necessarily meet it, but in terms of trying to prove a case in criminal court and civil court, it's very different, because the cases are presented different, and there's obviously different rights and things on the line. But ultimately, it's a lot easier to prove in civil court than in criminal court.
Do we expect to see a difference in testimony with this one? I mean, obviously, we heard from so many people, everybody in the House party and Michael Proctor and the other state investigators. Karen herself did not testify in her trial, but could she and would she in the civil suit here?
So she likely will have to be subject to depositions, and she, could potentially be called as a witness in the case. I think we're likely to see a lot of the same witnesses. I don't know that we will see quite the same volume. In the first trial, we had virtually everybody who was noticed to be a witness testify. I think there was upwards of 80 something witnesses. It was quite honed down in the second trial, but still a lot. And really, essentially, it is the same claim. The plaintiff's attorneys here are still making the claim that Karen Read hit John O'Keefe and caused his death. So we are going to see, the same police officers, the same likely civilian witnesses that were there that night. I don't know if they'll have the same experts or they'll hire different experts. That's their right to do so. But I think substantially similar to what we saw in the criminal trial.
Is it likely, I know the answer is going to be it's possible, but is it likely we could see something like an O.J. Simpson case where he is acquitted in the criminal trial and then is held responsible civilly? Like, could she be looking at that same kind of path?
I certainly think it's a possibility. Obviously, we don't know because we haven't seen the case presented. We don't know if they're going to be taking different tactics than they did in the criminal trial. But I certainly think it's something that has to be considered. I don't think it's off the bat something that she can look at and say, I'm certainly going to win, especially given the standard in a civil case. And I often compare it to the O.J. Simpson trial, in that you can be held, liable civilly, even if you're found not guilty. And that sometimes can be a bit confusing for people, outside of the system, because it seems to be in contradiction. But they're really looking for different remedies. One is to hold somebody criminally responsible for allegedly violating the law, and the other is for damages for distress and wrongdoing. So it'll be interesting.
Were people expecting her team to come out swinging and saying, we're going to sue all these people? And I guess this is a kind of a loaded question. One, were people expecting that? Two, is it unusual that that happens? And three, is it likely that they would win a suit like that?
So I think that many of us saw something along these lines coming. Her criminal attorney, Alan Jackson, who is also now on the civil case as well, appeared on a local radio show here, maybe within the last month or so, and mentioned possible suits that they might have against the Canton Police Department, potentially in federal court. I don't know that we knew that they were going to potentially sue the people in the House, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert,
Yeah,
the state police troopers individually. It's also difficult to know what the likelihood of the success on those claims are, because we don't actually know. They made sort of this broad claim that they're going to be suing these individuals and entities, but for what specifically they didn't
right.
state in court. So it's hard to know without knowing what they're actually going to plead in court. But I think it certainly complicates the trial track, and that's what the judge was concerned about on Monday, as you mentioned, that they were talking about a 2027 trial date. But
Yeah.
if we have 10 other people involved, we're looking at probably a lot later than that.
This case, it felt like it really took off when people started to take notice and started posting about her case a couple years ago. Like it didn't start out in that kind of big vein, and then now it feels like it's one of the most talked about true crime cases, at least of the year, if not in the last 3 years. What do you think it is about her case that has people hooked this long and has garnered her so many fans almost? I mean, people who are diehard free Karen Reed supporters.
I think it has sort of all the makings of a perfect story. The location, I think that whether you're from here in Massachusetts, or the Boston area, we have sort of this storied history, politically, corruption. So there's this line between the cops and the robbers. It's in the middle of a blizzard. We have a Boston police officer who's a victim, an attractive, educated white woman who's, accused of killing her boyfriend, and then we have all kinds of problematic issues with the police and the DA's office. So I think if you were writing the kind of story that would get attention, it would be this. It really has, sort of every box to be checked. And it really locally, I know it's garnered so much attention, nationally and internationally, but locally it really overtook Massachusetts, and people are highly, highly invested one way or the other. So it certainly has taken this area by storm.
Yeah, I want to go to one of the questions that we have live right now. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but the question is, can you explain the difference in the burden of proof in a criminal trial versus civil? And I know we talked about that it's different, but I guess why is it different? And when you're preparing as an attorney for those two different ones, is there a difference in that prep work based on what you have to prove?
There's not a difference necessarily in the prep work, but the reason why the burden of proof is different in a criminal prosecution is because when you have the government who's coming against you as an individual, whether it's the state government, whether it's the federal government, they have basically the weight and the ability of the resources of the government to prosecute you. So in order to fight up against that, we have a standard that says, okay, you can try to put me in jail, you can try to convict me of this crime, but you're going to have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. That means that, you can't just say, oh, I think he killed that person. We're kind of sure, and we'll put that person in prison for the rest of their life because of it. We want to make sure that we are holding the correct people responsible and
Right.
that we're holding the government responsible to their burden. And so in a civil case, it's different because what the plaintiffs are seeking are essentially monetary damages. It's
Right.
not, we're not putting anybody in jail. We're not taking anybody's life away. And so it's considered less, not less important of a case, but in terms of what's required to prove it, we don't hold civil plaintiffs to the same level that we would to the government.
That makes sense. Would you say now, going into this case, that her reputation is better than it was before the criminal trial?
Karen Reed's.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think even before the first criminal trial, I think certainly the public support and the public perception of her
Yeah.
is in her favor for sure. And so I don't think that has wavered much at all. I think people went into the trial thinking, that she was guilty, she was not guilty, and most people came out on the other side still thinking the same way. But I certainly think that the majority of the press that she gets, the attention that is sort of garnered, the case has garnered, is positive in her direction.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so as well. The next status hearing in this case is late November, so we have some time before we'll see this back in court. What can people expect to see at that status hearing, and even just going forward? I mean, if they're saying this could, go to trial in 2027, what's going to be happening from now in September 2025 till then?
So it's a little bit different in a civil case because a lot of things happen outside of court. You're not in court quite as much. What we'll see at the next court date is the judge will, if the defendants do file that motion asking the court to allow them to bring these third parties into the case, we might hear argument on that. They'll set a firm trial date. And what they're going to be doing in the next couple of years is essentially just what we call discovery in civil
Yeah.
litigation. So that's exchanging of, documents, subpoenas, videos, everything that came in the criminal case and probably more. Then they'll be doing depositions of all the different parties. So it's really going to depend on whether the defense counsel actually files suits against all these individuals, because
Yeah.
the realistic likelihood is if that happens, this case is, I mean, we might be looking at 5-6 years before it even gets to trial because it will be so voluminous, which can be the downside to the court system for sure.
Yeah. I mean, because they were looking at what, like 10 people to sue?
10 people to sue, and then I think it's likely once you sue those people, they might count to sue, and
Oh
then so
gosh.
then we have claims going every which way. And that basically the plaintiff's counsel's argument, which I think is fair, is, listen, these are separate third party actions. If you want to sue those people, sue those people. If we want to do discovery, consolidate for discovery purposes, essentially, let's all do one set deposition. But when the ultimate fact comes, we can try the wrongful death case and you can try the claims on your end, which would
Right.
make everything move a little bit faster. But that will be up to the court and what the judge decides.
And the justice system, notoriously very slow moving. We have another live
It
question I
is.
want to ask you. This question from Betsy: is there a maximum amount a person in Massachusetts can receive in a civil case?
Not that I'm aware of. Sometimes what can happen, and this is in all jurisdictions, is that if a plaintiff wins a jury verdict and the jury comes back with a astronomical amount, whether it's $400 million, and sometimes the judge will say, okay, that's not really reasonable, we'll set aside the dollar amount and we'll reduce it. But generally, there's no cap. In this case, they're asking, they met the minimum statutory requirement, which is asking for $50,000, but they haven't actually pled, which you can't in the body of the complaints in Massachusetts. So we don't know how much they're actually looking for, and that we won't know until we get to a jury if we get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, if we get there and when we get there. That makes sense.
That's right.
Catherine, I appreciate it so much. Where can people find you? I know you do a lot on TikTok and Instagram, and especially with people following Karen's case. Where can they find you for your coverage and analysis?
Yeah, so I'm mainly on TikTok, but a little bit everywhere. You can find me with the same handle. It's Note My Objection, NOTE My Objection, like in court. So I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate the analysis and you being on the East Coast for us. So whenever it's Karen Reed, we're going to you.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your night and a great weekend as well.
You too.
All right. Thanks, Catherine. All right. Thanks, everybody. Really good questions. We'll be paying attention to this, keeping up to date, especially with that next status hearing in late November. But coming up, segment 2, a big murder trial unfolding here in Arizona this week. We were doing opening statements the last 2 days. I have quite a bit to fill you guys in on. Stay tuned. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see behind the scenes here. If you're watching on streaming, you'll get some ads here for the next minute, and we'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back for segment 2 on the docket tonight. This is a case that is unfolding here in Arizona, and it is something that is a bit unique in terms of how this is playing out in the court system and the case itself. So I want to show you some video here. We're talking about Lisa and Germayne Cunningham and the death of 7-year-old Sanaa Cunningham in 2017. So you're seeing pictures here of Sanaa. This is a really sad story. Basically, from October of 2016 to February of 2017, Sanaa really started to see a decline in her health. But the question here is whether or not Lisa and Germayne caused that because of abuse and neglect, or if her medical diagnoses is the reason that she had a tragic death after she stopped breathing and eventually died from complications of sepsis. A little background here. So Germayne Cunningham was a Phoenix police officer at the time, and his wife, Lisa Cunningham, is from Australia. She is Sanaa's stepmom, but they took everybody under their wing. So ultimately, they actually ended up having 6 kids altogether. They had 2 of their own together, and they each came with 2 to the marriage. This was a really normal family. I mean, they would do things as a family. He was working hard as a police officer. The prosecution and the defense talked about Lisa quitting her job to be able to care for the kids and to be there, especially as Sanaa's medical issues started arising. So there were a lot of things going wrong. She was seeing a lot of doctors for physical issues, for mental issues, for behavioral issues, and we were talking even issues of self-harming and harming her other siblings. Sanaa in 2017 started going downhill pretty quickly, and it was around that time that she had been prescribed a new medication where the doctor allegedly told Lisa and Germayne that one of the symptoms, one of the side effects, would be that she could be in kind of this catatonic-like state. And that would be normal, but it was a side effect. They could expect that to happen, but things hopefully would get better from there. She was diagnosed with a schizophrenic disorder, a spectrum disorder, and other issues as well, mental issues and behavioral issues that played themselves out. That's what the medication was being used for. But in 2017, she started displaying these issues, and Germayne was working security at a Peter Piper Pizza off duty from his Phoenix police job, kind of like a second job at the time. And it was then that Lisa texted Germayne that Sanaa was having breathing issues. They had been taking videos to document what now we know to be her health decline. And they were showing those to doctors and trying to figure out ways to get her help, according to the defense's evidence. When Germayne got that text, he went home. And once he got home, it was clear that Sanaa was not okay. She was not only in a catatonic state, she was completely unresponsive. The prosecution describes it as a zombie-like state, and Lisa did not call 911. But when Germayne got home, he took Sanaa to an urgent care, and it was there that they said she needs way more help and you need to take her to the hospital. So they ended up going to Phoenix Children's Hospital, and it was there that she was pronounced dead from several different things, but mostly due to complications from sepsis. So this case is all about whether or not there was abuse or not. And this is where that claim comes into play. Germayne and Lisa were upfront with the police officers who were looking into Sanaa's death, telling officers that they often put gloves on her hands, put goggles on her face, and would use Germayne's long sleeve shirt to restrain her to certain, like a lawn chair and a water container, so that she wasn't harming herself or her siblings. They would often put her in the laundry room or the garage because they said she would defecate on herself, and there were a lot of issues with just what was going on with her other siblings in the home. But the way that they said this seemed a lot different than what the prosecution claims they found in text messages between Germayne and Lisa about what was happening behind the scenes with Sanaa. The prosecutors say in this case, this was a long time of abuse by the way that they were treating Sanaa, acting like it was her fault, basically as punishment for these medical issues, and that their neglect and their abuse of her led to her death, which is why Lisa and Germayne are facing 10 counts of child abuse and 1 count of first-degree murder. Neighbors had also reported that Sanaa would often be outside sleeping or laying in trash, that she was forced to do gardening for hours and hours in the summer heat, that one time she came to a neighbor's house and said she was kicked out of her own home, and that she needed to stay there. So the prosecution went first with their opening statements yesterday, basically setting up this case that there were months and months, even though there were medical issues, the way that Lisa and Germayne handled them was not okay, was abusive to the child, and ultimately led to her death. She had an abscess on her foot for a while, and it was that they believe likely led to an infection that Germayne and Lisa claim they didn't know about, but that the prosecution says they should have been tending to because she did have so many health issues. So I want to play a little bit about what the prosecution said when they discovered that there were text messages describing how they would treat Sanaa behind the scenes.
They discovered references to locking Sanaa in the garage, zip tying her to a water container. They discovered references to zip tying her in other areas of the home, locking her in the laundry room.
So that kind of laid out what Goodyear police detectives felt was grounds for child abuse cases, especially when they started interviewing other neighbors and other people. There was another very poignant part of the opening statements for the state when they were detailing and describing those moments when Germayne and Lisa brought Sanaa to urgent care, and then they were sent to Phoenix Children's Hospital. It was Germayne who, remember, a Phoenix police officer, was carrying Sanaa in his arms into the hospital, and it was a hospital staff member that said this the moment they walked into the emergency room.
They discovered references to locking Sanaa in the garage, zip tying her to a water container. They discovered references to zip tying her in other areas of the home, locking her in the laundry room.
Okay, we're trying to get the right bite there. I know that one replayed for you guys, but there was this really important part when they went into the hospital. Jason, do we have that bite? Okay, so I'm just set that back up for you guys. When Germayne walked into the hospital with his daughter in his arms, it was a hospital staff member that saw them first in the ER, and this was that staff member's immediate reaction.
They discovered references to nurse Thomas Stevens came forward seeing a person in a police uniform carrying a child covered in marks and bruises, listless, unresponsive, and says essentially, oh my God, you've rescued an abused child. And Germayne responded, no, this is my child.
And that is the crux of this case here. Did he take his daughter in time, and did he take her knowing that he was going to try to save her life in this moment? Or was he part of the problem that led to the condition that she was in? So then you had the defense teams ready for their opening statements. And this is an interesting and unique situation here. It's not all the time when there's two defendants like this, especially a couple, that you see two different defense teams. But in this case, Germayne has two attorneys for himself and Lisa has three attorneys for herself. And I will say, leading up to this trial, I have had some conversation with Lisa Cunningham as she has been in jail behind bars. She is extremely adamant that they did not abuse their daughter, that they did not lead to her death, anything that they did, and is very upset with the system, basically claiming that they've been punished now for something that medically they could not prevent. So she is very adamant, and that is basically the path that both defense teams are taking here. Germayne's team was up first, though, and they were basically pointing to the fact that when Germayne got a text from Lisa that something was very wrong, he rushed home and then did rush his daughter to the hospital. But they're saying that he had no idea that his daughter had an infection and believed that her symptoms that she was experiencing to them were due to the side effects that they were expecting to happen from this new medication. There were other doctors who had seen Sanaa and had not seen or diagnosed any sort of infection either. So his defense team really went into the fact that he would have had no idea that she had a deadly infection until they got to the hospital where that was finally diagnosed.
Germayne Cunningham is not a doctor. He has no stethoscope. He doesn't have a white jacket, and he has no medical degree. Yet, here we are. Because Germayne Cunningham, a father, did not see what even doctors miss. A silent infection that became deadly. And they call that murder. Germayne Cunningham did not murder his daughter.
So they went on with his opening statements yesterday before they would get to Lisa's today. Something that was brought up in all of the days was there were 3 DCS reports that were made in this case, but 2 of them were found unsubstantiated, and one of them was being investigated when Sanaa passed away. One of those reports was made by Germayne's mother herself. She's going to be testifying, as is Sanaa's biological mother, who also was in on that report as well. Basically now, the state is going to use those as star witnesses to say they saw something was wrong beforehand and that clearly there was an issue here that was putting Sanaa in danger. The defense is going to try to discredit them based on the kind of relationships that they had. So we'll see how that part plays out. Lisa Cunningham's defense attorney took a little bit of a different approach. I would say Germayne's team took more of the approach that this was a father who loved his daughter and would have never known that what she actually died from was something she was experiencing. She wasn't able to verbalize things the way that you would if you were sick like that and anything like that. So on Lisa's standpoint, from her defense team side, they went more the medical route. They basically went through hours, and I'm talking nearly 4 hours of describing to the jury the lengthy history of in and out of doctors' offices, all of these different mental health issues, behavioral issues, physical issues, eating disorders, mood disorders. The list goes on and on with the amount of illness and issues that Sanaa suffered. And you could tell Lisa's team wanted to go so far into detail with the jury so that they couldn't possibly believe for a second that Lisa caused all of the things that Sanaa was already dealing with. It was very clear that that was their MO for their opening statements. And so they went over all of the things that had been leading up to her death. And they also showed those text messages that Germayne and Lisa had sent each other for weeks, months leading up to Sanaa's death, but they painted them in a much different light. And of course, that is what these attorneys do, right? If you're the prosecution in the state, you're creating the narrative for your side. If you're the defense team here, you are creating the narrative that you believe true for your clients. They believe, or they are putting out there to the jury, that the text messages between the couple were actually a lot different. They weren't nefarious, but rather two parents who are very frustrated by the fact that nothing seemed to be working for Sanaa. She seemed to be declining while doctors were diagnosing her with things, but they weren't sure how to properly handle this all. And then even worse, their other kids were expressing concern that Sanaa was a safety hazard, a danger to all of them in the household. Take a listen to what Lisa's attorney had to say about that.
These are parents that are struggling, and yet they don't want to institutionalize her. They are struggling. They're hanging on, trying to do everything they can as parents, as loving parents who care about this child more than anything else in their life. It has become the center of their world, their universe, of what they are trying to do to help this child, this poor child who, through no fault of her own, is just afflicted with multiple mental illnesses.
And he went on for a while today to really talk about all of that in full detail with the jury. Once we got through Lisa's opening statements from her defense team, they then started with their first witness, which was a Phoenix police officer in the homicide unit. And that's where we ended today. Now, we are not going to be in court every single day. I'm going to be staying in touch with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and Lisa's lead defense attorney, who was not the one that did the opening statements, about what's going on in this case, because they are planning for this case to go until March of next year. March 31st, 2026 was actually what the judge said. That is an exceptionally long trial. Often we see lengths like that for death penalty trials. And this one started out as that. They were going to be seeking the death penalty against both Lisa and Germayne, but the Maricopa County Attorney's Office took that off the table earlier this year in February, did not offer a reason as to why they did that. Lisa and Germayne still face, though, 10 counts of child abuse and 1 count of first-degree murder. When you have a case that has that many different counts and charges, and we're talking about first-degree murder, which in their case, if they were convicted, would be life in prison, you have so much to go through. And we're also talking years of medical issues, doctors. There's going to be so many people testifying in this. We know that Sanaa's biological mother will be testifying, her siblings will be testifying, DCS workers will be testifying, teachers, medical professionals, likely neighbors who were in the area. I mean, there are so many people here that are going to end up taking the stand in this case. And ultimately, it will be in spring of next year that we likely find out what they believe, what the fate is really of Germayne and Lisa Cunningham. This is an interesting one. And I will say this too, be prepared to see possibly guilty on some counts and not guilty on others. This is not like they're either going to be guilty on everything, not guilty on everything. There could be a range within that frame there, but really that first degree murder charge, of course, being the most serious, but also those child abuse charges, they tend to line up with certain instances that happened with Sanaa, and they're going to take the jury and the court through each of those instances as each side builds their case. So we'll be following this for sure. Lisa and Germayne in the courtroom every day. They are not in orange jumpsuits. They are wearing civilian clothes and suits. So it almost looks like they are part of their actual attorney teams. But they'll be in there every day for the next 6 months, and we'll be following that trial through to the end as well. So a big trial, though, here in Arizona, of course, just a completely tragic loss of Sanaa. And the videos and the pictures they showed of her decline in court were honestly hard to see, even for somebody like me who is used to seeing these kinds of things and is used to dealing with murder cases. This one really got to me. I felt like I was on the verge of tears when I was seeing some of those videos of what she looked like in the weeks before she died. So it does pull at your heartstrings, and now this case has gone on longer than Sanaa was even alive. So we'll be following this to the very end and keeping you up to date with what happens with Germayne and Lisa Cunningham. Coming up, we've got one more segment tonight in the evidence vault, the Gilgo Beach murders, the Long Island serial killer. A lot of people talking about this nationwide. An update in court this week and what his family is saying, coming up next. All right, welcome back to the final segment, the evidence vault, the Long Island serial killer case, the Gilgo Beach murders out of New York. I know this is one that so many people have followed for a while now. Rex Heuermann was a Manhattan-based architect until he was arrested and is suspected Long Island serial killer. These were women that went missing or were killed in the time frame of about 1990 to 2010 or 2011. And they started being discovered around 2011, but they weren't all tied together until DNA was able to tie them together pretty recently. And it was that led to Rex Heuermann's arrest. The defense had been fighting for there to be different trials for all of these victims because they basically argued that the MO for each case was different and that a jury would not be able to separate the evidence in those cases. The judge did not agree. He said there's going to be a single trial for Rex Heuermann for all 7 victims that are in the Long Island serial killer case. The court also said that they will allow nuclear DNA to be introduced, which will link evidence from rootless hairs to Heuermann at the different crime scenes. The defense team has until January 13th to file pretrial motions in this, but this definitely sets up what the judge is going to allow or not allow in this case. And it's clear the judge feels that all of these victims deserve to be in one big case. All DNA is going to be admissible in this case. And that is definitely a win for the prosecution when you're talking about setting up this trial. This trial is going to be huge. There is no trial date that's set yet. In court this week, Rex Heuermann did not show any emotion. You really could not read anything on his face, but his family was there. And this is the part that I find extremely fascinating about the Long Island serial killer case. You can see Rex Heuermann right there. There's his mugshot. He is allegedly responsible for all of these murders, but was living a more lavish lifestyle in Manhattan and kind of living a double life. Allegedly a serial killer on one side of this, and a businessman, architect, doing deals, living more that glamorous Manhattan life on the other side of things. So where does his family fall when they were in court? Well, this is what is actually the most interesting of all that I think we learned and heard about this week. His wife and his daughter were in court this week, and the defense team says they will continue to visit Rex in jail as this trial approaches and as they wait. But how do they feel about things? Well, his wife does not believe Rex is the Long Island serial killer. But as we learned and what the attorney said this week, his daughter Victoria feels differently.
She most likely believes that her father is the Gilgo Beach serial killer.
So that was an interesting revelation that we did not know before. And I don't know how this is going to work. You can even see on your screen there, his wife on one side, the daughter on the other, and they are both the ones in court together, both the two that are visiting Rex. One of them believes that he's a serial killer and the other doesn't. I don't even know how as a family you work through that as you're getting closer to a trial that's of this magnitude. But that definitely offers another kind of layer to this entire story. Is he or is he not? The wife says no. The daughter says yes. Her lawyer says they'll be at all of the court hearings and they will continue visiting him. But because we're talking about 7 victims in one trial and the scope of 1990 to 2010 or 11, the amount of evidence and discovery that has to be done in this case is so immense. We are used to seeing that in these big murder trials, but this one is maybe even bigger than most that we've seen in recent history. Both attorneys on both sides talked about how difficult it is in this discovery period to collect all of this evidence. Take a listen to what they had to say about that.
A dizzying amount of information, 7 murders that span from 1993 to 2010. We'll have over 100 witnesses coming in from 15 different states.
This is a mountain of mountains. You got to remember, we're talking about 30 years of investigation. We're talking about 7 victims.
Okay, over 100 witnesses in a case is practically unheard of. I've never seen that in my career. And so to even get through that, I don't even want to think about how long this trial is going to be. Trials that have lasted months and months and months have maybe 40 witnesses, maybe up to 80 witnesses. I've never heard of 100 witnesses. And when you're also talking about flying people in from different states, that can get really complicated just for the logistics of a trial. I imagine we're going to see so many delays in this case just because there are so many different moving parts with people who are involved in the case, with witnesses they're going to need to bring in, and then all the interviews they're going to have to do ahead of time as well. I think that's why we didn't see a trial date set yet, but it would not surprise me if this doesn't happen until at maybe the earliest 2027. I think this case will go well into 2028, and I would not be surprised by that at all, which is really crazy when you're thinking about these victims who have waited for justice for so long, their families, some of them from as early as 1990. And there you can see the victims here on your screen. So all of those victims will be in one trial together for Rex Heuermann when that comes. But again, over 100 witnesses coming from 15 different states, decades of evidence, decades of discovery that they have to do to try to link this Manhattan architect to all of these crimes, and really kind of who's become a modern day serial killer that we just don't see much anymore, mainly because of DNA and just the fact that I don't even think you can become a serial killer in the same capacity anymore because of DNA, because of surveillance, because of location, because of GPS. The list goes on and on. So we'll be following the Long Island serial killer case. I know everybody who follows true crime will be as well and is paying close attention to that. I want to thank everybody for joining us live. I know there's football on Thursdays. We appreciate you guys tuning in live and choosing us. We love having you. I want to show you guys just a little view in our control room of Jason and Jake, who are back there pushing all the buttons, doing all the control room stuff back there. There they are. Nice. Hi, guys. They'll be over there each Thursday, and we appreciate everything they're doing back there as well. But thank you so much. Thank you to Catherine Loftus for joining us live from the East Coast, staying up past her bedtime to do that. And then, of course, all the analysis and questions that you guys pose to us as well. We'll be back next Thursday with a lot more. And stay tuned, you guys. We are planning a very special Halloween show, October show. A little spooky, a little paranormal. We'll have that coming up too next month. Thanks again. I'm Briana Whitney, host of True Crime AZ Live. Good night.